This morning I'm making my very famous banana cake, and sometimes I make it from scratch, but more often I make it from a doctored cake mix. I don't know what it is about me, but I tend to feed people when I sense that they're in pain or struggling with something. And one of my very, very close friends is struggling today. And so I thought that I'd do a porch drop-off for her of this cake. Maybe it's the Croatian, Slovenia, Austrian, Hungary, Eastern European background, but I think my people fed other people, and that's why I tend to do it as well. I'm going to start today with a Duncan Hines Banana Supreme cake mix, and I'm just going to dump that into the bowl. Now, my mother taught me a lot of these tricks of how to make a cake mix doctored so that it tastes like a scratch-made bakery type of cake. And her secret ingredient was always pudding. She would add this to every cake that she ever made. I'm adding a small carton of banana cream pudding, and you would be amazed at how much flavor this adds. Now, the next thing I'm doing is I'm adding extra eggs. Normally in a cake you add between 2 and 3 eggs. I'm adding 4 eggs, just to give it that extra rich flavor. And I will put the recipe on the website. Instead of water, I'm using 1.5 cups of milk. And this is skim milk because this is what I had in my refrigerator. And a cup, instead of using oil, which is what the cake mix calls for, I'm using butter in a doubled amount. So the cake mix calls for 1/2 cup of oil. I'm using 1 cup of melted butter. Sometimes if I'm in a hurry, I use water and don't worry about melting the butter, especially if I don't have any. Then I'm going to mix this for a couple of minutes. So now that I've mixed the cake, you can see that it's a nice fluid mixture. It's not too dry, it's not too loose. I take 3 8-inch pans that I have sprayed liberally with Pam and then put some flour and sprinkled the flour all around to help make sure that my cake does not stick to the pan. And I'm going to evenly divide the mix between all 3 pans. Then I use my spatula to lightly spread the mix over the pans. Don't touch the bottom with your spatula or your cake may stick. I then tap each pan a couple times to get the air bubbles out of them. I'm going to put these in the oven at 350. They generally bake for anywhere between 15 and 25 minutes. I check them with a toothpick very often because you do not want to overcook these. And I'll see you back when they are all cooked and ready to frost. So my cakes have baked and they're cooling down right now. And I will show you how I make the frosting now. This is a very simple American buttercream. To my mixer, pardon me, I have added 2 sticks of butter that have been brought to room temperature and 1 cup of vegetable shortening. And I'm going to cream those together. Now some people definitely swear that you should use your your paddle attachment to do this. I never use that. I always use my whisk attachment. And this is going to cream together for a good 10 minutes. I scrape down the sides after only a couple minutes so that I make sure everything is going to get incorporated together. After about 5 minutes of whipping, I add a dash of salt and about a teaspoon of vanilla, maybe 2 teaspoons. I don't really measure. And I continue whipping. My shortening and butter have whipped together very nicely, and you can see it's a very nice consistency that looks actually like frosting already. But of course it doesn't have anything sweet in it. So at this point, what I do is I add my sugar. And of course I'll put the recipe up on the website. But this is 2 cups of confectioners sugar. And I go ahead and add it all at once. I know some people don't. They add it a little bit at a time. I don't really see a problem with adding it at once. I start the mixer off slow, and you can put a towel around it if you're worried about the sugar going everywhere. All right, it's pretty well mixed in at this point. All right, my frosting has been whipping for about 10 more minutes, and it is nice and fluffy. If it's too thick, you can add a teaspoon of milk at a time to loosen it up. I also tasted it and thought that it needed a little bit more sugar, so I added another ½ cup. I tasted it again, and it was perfect. So now I just am going to make sure I get it all off of my beater, and the next thing I'm going to do is frost my cakes. All right, we're back, and my cakes have cooled nicely. It's winter, so I actually put them outside to cool on a table in the garage, and they cooled down pretty quickly. I have finished my frosting, which you can see is a nice texture. It's whipped, tastes great. And I'm going to start with my bottom layer on my cake pan. I do put parchment paper underneath this layer, and the reason that I do that is I'm going to be putting nuts onto the cake, and this just helps keep a relatively clean surface. I start with putting a nice dollop of the frosting onto my first layer and just spread that evenly. Now these cake layers, oh, and by the way, I have the bottom side up. These cake layers turned out pretty evenly. Sometimes they won't be quite so even, so you can trim them, or you can just use frosting to make one side higher than the other so that it's more even. In other words, you're evening out the cake with the frosting. All right, the next thing that I do is take my second layer, and I think I'll use this layer. Just gingerly let it fall from the cake rack. Again, bottoms together. It's a very forgiving cake. Another big dollop of frosting. Use your offset knife. You can use a butter knife if you only have that. I did that for many years before I got my offset knife, but I love this offset knife. It's a Michael's purchase, and you can get it for 50% off usually. I think Hobby Lobby sells them. I think Joanne sells them. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it to make sure that I have nice, even layers. Now my last piece is the top. And I'm going to put that so that the bottom side is up. You can also do a crumb layer. I don't tend to do crumb layers because my cakes are fairly moist, but if you want to do a crumb layer, it's a nice thin layer of frosting. You stick your cake in the refrigerator and let it cool down, and then you put a regular amount of frosting on it. I'm now going to do the sides. If you have a turntable, you can use a turntable to do this. Sometimes I put my cakes on a cardboard plate that you can get at Michael's or Joann's or Hobby Lobby. These are all Wilton products. And I'm just going to go around and make sure that the sides are all covered. Good morning.
Good afternoon.
It's my son Daniel.
You can edit this out. I'm going snowboarding.
All right, now that I have made the sides frosted, I take chopped walnuts. These were whole in a bag, and my husband was kind enough to chop them up for me. Just chop them medium to fine, and you're going to go all the way around your cake and just lightly press them in to the sides. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Mine are rarely perfect. Some have maybe higher sides than others. And now you can see why I put parchment paper down. And I like to have a little bit of nuts left over to sprinkle on top so that people know what they're getting. We're getting close to the end here. All right, now that I've done that, the next thing that I do is frost the top. I put a nice sized dollop on the top. Just go around and make sure the whole thing is frosted. Some people start on the top and work their way down the sides. I find this technique that I just showed you works better for me. All right, I tend to have about a half a cup to a cup of frosting left at the end, which I have in this case. So what I do is I take a Wilton decorating bag over my glass, and I have a tip already in there, and I drop some of this into the bag so that I can make some very pretty decorations on top. Once you have your frosting in the bag, just lift up your bag to close it. And you can see I already have a tip. I don't even know what tip number. Oh, it's a 1B tip. Twist your bag and just go around your cake and make some pretty decorations. Just eyeball it, doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to make one nice big one in the middle. It's maybe a little bit taller. All right, then I take the rest of my nuts, just sprinkle a few on top. Makes for a nice extra presentation. You don't want to go too crazy. And then I take my parchment paper pieces and I just discard them. Being careful not to spill the nuts onto my tray. If a few of the nuts fall down, I just push them back onto the cake. And finally this one. And that makes for a lovely presentation that everyone seems to request. And I will present this to my friend who can use a little TLC today. I hope that you'll try making this, and when she eats it, I'll take some video so that I can show you what the slice looks like. It's very moist and it's very delicious. Thanks for watching.
This is Eileen's banana cake that I love every time.
Be sincere.
Really delicious.
Is it good?
Extremely moist. Love it.
I'm glad.
One of the best banana cakes ever.
You deserve it today.
Thank you, Eileen. Really
You're welcome.
appreciate this.